A farmer who built his entire YouTube career on telling the truth about agriculture spent this year suing the very industry he built his reputation on. Cole the Cornstar has spent nearly 8 years showing the internet exactly what modern farming looks like: the wins, the losses, and the equipment that breaks at the worst possible moment. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a single grain bin became the most expensive lesson of his career, and why the same year that exposed it is the year he chose to rebuild something far older than any piece of equipment he owns. Cole wasn't supposed to be a full-time farmer when this all started. He was enrolled at the University of Northern Iowa, working toward a degree in finance and accounting. Farming ran in his blood, 4, now 5 generations deep on the same central Iowa ground. But YouTube wasn't part of the plan. The idea came together almost by accident, late one night while brainstorming names with friends. By morning, he had a channel. No business plan, no camera crew. Just a phone, a farm, and a name that stuck before he'd even uploaded a single video. October 1st, 2018. That's the date his first video went live. Combined down, pop tire. No script, no production budget, no plan beyond showing what actually happens on a working farm when something breaks in the middle of a job. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't supposed to be. A pop tire on a combine is the kind of problem every farmer deals with and nobody outside agriculture ever sees. That gap between what farming actually looks like and what most people assume it looks like became the entire foundation of the channel. That same year, his grandfather passed away. Cole has talked about watching his grandfather work every single day of his life, sacrificing everything to keep the farm running, never asking for recognition. The channel became something more than content after that. It became a way to honor a legacy that started long before any of this was filmable. A way to make sure the work his grandfather poured his life into didn't just disappear into another generation's spreadsheets in silence. What he built from that starting point wasn't a farming tutorial channel. It was a documentary of decisions. Some smart, some expensive, all real. Sponsorships came. So did an audience that skewed overwhelmingly male, 25 to 55, split almost evenly between people who grew up on farms and people who had never set foot on one. Roughly half his viewers came from rural backgrounds and half from cities, a split that became one of the channel's quiet strengths. Subscribers climbed past 200,000, then 450,000, then well past 600,000, with the channel eventually crossing well over 130 million total views. That early audience growth wasn't driven by algorithm luck. It was driven by a format nobody else in farming content was doing consistently: full transparency about money. Cole has shown viewers what it actually costs to run a piece of equipment for a season, what a bad harvest does to a balance sheet, and what it looks like to convince a bank to lend a young farmer $1 million. Most agricultural creators avoid those numbers entirely, treating finances as a private matter, even while showing every other part of the operation on camera. Cole built his entire audience by doing the opposite. And that willingness to show the math is part of why a story like the bin site lawsuit landed so differently on his channel than it would have anywhere else. His audience had already been trained, video after video, to expect real numbers instead of vague references to a tough year. That openness extended to a project he calls the Field of Dreams house, a personal home build documented in pieces across the channel, separate from the working farm itself. Another example of Cole treating major life decisions as content rather than keeping them off camera. It established a pattern long before the bin site or the mansion ever entered the picture. If it was happening on Cornstar Farms or in Cole's life, it was probably going to end up in a video, mistakes included. But the audience that found Cole through tractor breakdowns and harvest chaos had no idea what was waiting for him on his own property, a structure that would turn into the most expensive dispute of his career. Every farm eventually needs more storage than it has. Grain bins are not a small investment. For an operation running close to 2,000 acres, the math on storage capacity decides how much grain you can hold back from the market versus how much you're forced to sell at harvest time prices, often the worst prices of the year. Cole made the decision to build big. A bin site valued at $1 million went up on Cornstar Farms, designed to give the operation real flexibility in how and when it sold its crop, and to put real distance between Cole's farm and the kind of forced harvest season selling that eats into every operation's margins. That kind of investment is supposed to pay for itself in better marketing decisions for years to come. Instead, it became a problem Cole couldn't simply farm his way out of. Something about the construction didn't hold up the way it should have. The details of exactly what went wrong are limited. Cole has said directly on camera that his lawyer told him there's a lot he legally cannot discuss publicly. But the outcome wasn't subtle. He filed a lawsuit against the contractor responsible for the bin site, turning a structure meant to solve a problem into the single largest unresolved liability on the farm. It's worth pausing on what that $1 million figure actually represents for an operation Cole's size. This isn't a hobby farm absorbing a bad purchase. It's a working business where that kind of capital outlay has to be financed, insured, and accounted for against a backdrop of commodity prices that swing year to year regardless of what's happening with construction contracts. A failed bin site doesn't just sit there as dead weight. It actively interferes with the marketing flexibility the investment was supposed to create in the first place, forcing decisions back toward the harvest time selling pressure Cole built the bins specifically to avoid. For a creator whose entire channel runs on transparency, that's a difficult position. Farmers don't typically air their legal disputes for an audience of hundreds of thousands of people. Litigation is slow, expensive, and usually handled as quietly as possible, especially when a contractor relationship and a farm's reputation in a tight-knit agricultural community are both on the line. But Cole did it anyway, carefully, within the boundaries his attorney allowed, turning what could have been a quiet, embarrassing problem into an ongoing storyline his audience followed for years. The lawsuit update videos didn't pretend to have all the answers. One was framed around a direct, almost desperate appeal. If anyone in his audience knew the contractor involved, could they pass along a message asking him to call? That's not the language of a creator manufacturing drama for views. That's the language of someone genuinely stuck, using the only tool he had left, his platform, to try to resolve something the legal system wasn't resolving fast enough. Late's the number that came next. Nobody who followed this channel expected it. Years after the lawsuit first surfaced, the bin site finally got a resolution, but not the one most viewers were hoping for. In a video posted in 2026, Cole confirmed the bin site is being torn down entirely and rebuilt from scratch, not patched, not repaired around the edges, demolished. For a structure that cost $1 million to put up in the first place, a full teardown represents a financial decision most farm operations spend years trying to avoid, sinking that much capital into infrastructure, only to have to start over from the foundation up, mid-litigation, with harvest season never far enough away to actually pause and rebuild calmly. Cole was characteristically restrained about the details. He acknowledged there's still a lot his lawyer has instructed him not to discuss. What he did confirm is enough to understand the stakes. The original construction had problems severe enough that rebuilding from the ground up was the only real option left. Whatever compromise might have existed, a partial fix, a structural patch, a negotiated repair, apparently wasn't on the table anymore by the time this decision got made. This is where the story stops being about one bad contractor and starts being about what running a modern grain operation actually requires. Storage infrastructure isn't optional padding on a farm budget. It's core to how an operation manages risk. A bin site that fails doesn't just cost the money spent building it. It costs flexibility during harvest, leverage in grain marketing, and trust in vendors that farmers like Cole depend on for major capital projects going forward. Every future contractor relationship Cole enters into now carries the shadow of this one. There's also a timing problem that rarely gets discussed in coverage of farm equipment disputes. Construction and litigation don't pause for planting season, and they don't pause for harvest either. Cole has had to manage this dispute alongside the normal demands of running close to 2,000 acres, input costs, weather risk, labor scheduling, equipment maintenance, none of which slows down because a grain bin lawsuit is working its way through the legal system. The teardown didn't happen the moment problems were discovered. It happened years later, after litigation ran its course, which means Cole effectively operated without full confidence in his storage infrastructure for an extended stretch of his farming career. The teardown also says something about Cole specifically. He could have absorbed the loss quietly, kept using a flawed structure, and avoided drawing more attention to a problem that had already dragged on for years through legal proceedings. Instead, he chose to rebuild it correctly, on camera, in front of the same audience that watched the lawsuit unfold from the beginning. That's a harder path than simply moving on. That decision, full demolition over compromise, is the through line connecting everything else that happened on Cornstar Farms this year. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. While the bin site dispute consumed the legal and financial side of Cole's year, something entirely different was happening on a different corner of the property. Cole began restoring a structure he calls his great-great-grandfather's mansion, a house purchased, by his own account, for just $7,000. The contrast with the $1 million bin site couldn't be sharper. One project represents modern agricultural infrastructure gone wrong. built by outside contractors, governed by contracts and lawyers, and outcomes Cole couldn't fully control. The other represents generational history, bought for almost nothing, in desperate need of saving, and entirely within Cole's own hands to fix or fail. The mansion wasn't move-in ready. Footage from the project shows Cole clearing out what he's described as a hoarder-level mess before any actual restoration work could begin. Years, possibly decades, of accumulated neglect packed into a structure that once belonged to working family farmland generations before Cole was born. From there, the project expanded room by room, removing and rebuilding a warped second-story floor, tearing out outdated walls, repairing rotted sections of the original structure, and eventually moving into entirely new construction. 3 new bathrooms built from scratch inside a house built for a different century, with plumbing and fixtures that had to be designed around walls and framing nobody alive had built. At one point, the team even worked on pouring a new foundation underneath sections of the existing mansion, a task that requires lifting and stabilizing an old structure while completely replacing what it sits on. That's not a weekend project. That's the kind of work that takes a real construction crew months, and Cole was documenting it largely with what he's described as a few simple tools, strong hands, and help from neighbors and friends, rather than a hired-out general contractor. It's worth noting how differently Cole approached risk in this project compared to the bin site. With the mansion, there was no large contractor relationship to manage, no significant capital outlay to finance, and no legal exposure if a wall came down crooked or a floor needed a second attempt. The risk was almost entirely physical and time-based rather than financial, the kind of risk Cole could absorb personally, learn from in real time, and correct without involving a single outside party. That distinction matters more than it might seem, because it explains why one project could run smoothly enough to become a feel-good restoration story, while the other turned into a years-long legal entanglement. Here's what makes this angle different from anything else covered about Cole's channel. Most coverage of him focuses entirely on the farm, the equipment, the crop yields, the business decisions. The mansion restoration rarely gets mentioned in the same breath as the bin site lawsuit, even though Cole himself has linked the two directly in his own content, treating them as parallel updates in the same video, as if the two stories were always meant to be told together rather than as separate chapters of his year. One project is about correcting an expensive mistake. The other is about preserving something his family built generations before any of this, the farm, the channel, the lawsuit, ever existed. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Put the bin site and the mansion side by side, and a pattern emerges that explains more about Cole than either story does on its own. The bin site cost $1 million and failed. The mansion cost $7,000 and is succeeding. Slowly, room by room, built almost entirely on labor instead of capital. Cole didn't choose between them. He ran both simultaneously, documenting the most expensive failure of his farming career, alongside the cheapest, most hands-on success of his personal life. Often within the same uploads, sometimes within the same sentence. That's not a coincidence. It reflects something Cole has said about himself directly, that his goal from the start was never just to show farming. It was to prove that ambitious projects, attacked with what he calls unrelenting and unwavering force, can actually work. The bin site tested that philosophy against modern construction, contractor accountability, and a legal system that moves slower than a growing season. The mansion tested it against decay, neglect, and a structure nobody else wanted to save. Two completely different tests, run in the same calendar year, against the same underlying belief. One test came back with a lawsuit, the other came back with a rebuilt second-story floor and 3 new bathrooms. There's a version of this story where Cole simply stops talking about the bin site once the lawsuit got difficult, and quietly lets the mansion become the feel-good replacement narrative, the easy redemption arc that lets a tense legal situation fade into the background. That's the obvious move, and it's the one most creators in his position would make. Cole didn't make it. He kept posting lawsuit updates even when there wasn't good news to share, kept acknowledging the limits his lawyer placed on what he could say, and kept the bin site visible right up through the demolition itself. The mansion never replaced the bin site story, it ran alongside it. There's also a financial logic underneath both projects that ties back to how Cole has built his entire operation. He and his family have talked openly about reinvesting channel earnings directly into Cornstar farms, equipment upgrades, storage improvements, infrastructure that keeps the operation competitive against bigger, better capitalized neighbors. The bin site was part of that reinvestment strategy before it went wrong. The mansion restoration, by contrast, runs almost entirely outside that system. It's sweat equity, sponsorship supported but not capital intensive, the kind of project that doesn't depend on a contractor getting it right the first time, because the only person Cole has to hold accountable is himself. Viewed together, this year wasn't really about one disaster and one redemption story. It was about a creator running two completely different models for how to build something that lasts. One through capital and contracts, one through labor and patience, and learning in real time which one actually held up under pressure. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. Strip away the individual storylines, and what's left is a channel built almost entirely on accumulated trust. Cole didn't get to the point where $1 million lawsuit and a mansion restoration could run as parallel storylines by accident. He got there because, for nearly 8 years, his audience watched him post real numbers, real breakdowns, real decisions, including the bad ones. That's a harder model to sustain than scripted drama. It requires actually being willing to show a tractor under a lawyer-imposed gag order, discussing a contractor he had to sue, in the same channel where he's also showing off a bathroom he built with his own hands in a house that's been in his family for generations. Most creators would pick one tone and stay there. Cole has spent years refusing to. Most farming content creators pick a lane. Either the channel is aspirational, clean equipment, big numbers, success stories, or it's confessional, leaning hard into hardship for sympathy and engagement. Cole's channel has never fully committed to either. The bin site lawsuit isn't framed as a redemption arc. It's framed, plainly, as an unresolved problem that cost real money and is still costing time, even in the demolition phase. The mansion isn't framed as an escape from farm stress. It's framed as its own demanding project, with its own setbacks, warped floors, failed foundations, walls that had to come out entirely before anything could go back in. Neither story gets the easy ending. That refusal to oversimplify either storyline is likely why both have held audience attention for years, rather than fading after a single viral video. People don't come back for resolution. They come back to see what the next update actually says, which is exactly what happened when the November 2025 huge farm update paired genuinely good farm news with what Cole himself called boring news about the lawsuit, in the same breath, without dramatizing either one. That kind of restraint is rare in a content category built almost entirely around exaggeration. It also explains why this particular video title resonates the way it does. Asking what really happened to Cole's farm this year isn't really a question about crop yields or weather patterns, the things most farming content treats as the entire story. It's a question about two parallel construction projects, one that cost a fortune and failed, and one that cost almost nothing and is slowly succeeding, both running through the same person's hands in the same 12 months. That's a more complicated answer than most channels in this niche ever attempt, and it's exactly the kind of complexity Cole's audience has shown, year after year, that it's willing to sit through. He never let either story fully resolve until this year, and that restraint is the real reason both are still being watched. What this year actually confirmed about Cole the Cornstar isn't that farming is risky. Everyone already knew that. It's that the same person capable of losing $1 million to a construction failure is also capable of pouring a new foundation under a 100-year-old mansion with nothing but friends, hand tools, and stubbornness. Those two stories, running side by side, say more about who Cole actually is than either one could alone, and more than any single farming season ever could. What comes next is straightforward but far from finished. The bin site rebuild has to be completed before the next harvest puts real pressure on storage capacity again. The mansion restoration still has rooms left to go. And Cole, by every indication from his own channel, has no plans to slow down on either one, even with two major, expensive, unfinished projects running at the same time, on the same family operation. Do you think Cole made the right call going public with the bin site lawsuit, or should that have stayed private while he focused entirely on the mansion? Let me know which project you'd want to see finished first.